who has the organization Moms of Black Boys United. You're going to hear a lot about the work that they do. She's an amazing woman who has responded to the challenge and the crisis that so many of our young men and our families find themselves in. And so I'm going to be thrilled to introduce her to you and to hear her words of wisdom this evening. Joining her tonight are two of my dearest friends, Mr. Ron Walker, head of the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color. We have a long history together in this work and in this movement, and want to welcome my good friend Ron here this evening. And joining Ron and Depelsha, my brother, Shawn, the head of the campaign for Black Male Achievement, one of the true soldiers, leaders, was really helped to spearhead so much of this movement that we have been engaged in. Tonight's installment is called Saving Our Sons. And so I couldn't think of three better people who I know who've been deeply, deeply involved in this space. So I want to ask those who have tuned in tonight to please text your friends to join us in this conversation. Hashtag Virtual Village, hashtag EAFNYC, and let them know, come on over. We're about to hear some very, very powerful gems from some very, very powerful and committed people. And so we're going to get this show started right away. And I want to welcome Ms. Depelsha McGruder. And Depelsha, first of all, good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm blessed to be here and to be with you. And so, you know, I've told a number of people that you were going to be joining us. They had not heard of your organization. And I said, well, you're in for a treat tonight. And so I want to ask you, first of all, to tell us what motivated you to start Moms of Black Boys United. You know, what was the inspiration for that? And then what are some of the key policies that Mob United is advocating for that you believe will help to decrease the over-criminalization and reinforcement of negative perceptions of our boys? Tell us about it.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say what an honor it is to be here this evening. I hear a little feedback. I don't know what's causing that. Is that Shawn? Okay, Shawn. So
me?
Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I have admired all of your work, all three of you, for so long. So it's just an honor for me to be here in the midst representing the ladies. So you asked what inspired me to start Mob United. And, you know, when I tell this story, I always say I wasn't trying to start anything. I think that's very important to say, because if I was trying to do it, it wouldn't have worked. But what happened was the summer of 2016, if you remember, there were multiple back-to-back killings of unarmed Black men by police. And it happened within a matter of 24 to 48 hours. So first there was Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, followed by Philando Castile in Minnesota. And in both cases, the images were shown repeatedly on the news. They were very graphic. And I went to bed, you know, the night of Alton Sterling's death, with those images seared in my mind. I've been watching CNN all night. We had flown back from Atlanta, where I'm from, and in the airport they were playing it. I got home, they were playing it. And so I went to bed with those images in my mind. And the next morning, I woke up and turned on CNN again, and there was a family in Minnesota talking about something, and I couldn't connect the dots. I didn't understand, like, is this Alton Sterling's family in Minnesota who's heard about this? Like, how does this connect? And when I found out that it was actually a different case that had happened, Philando Castile, that was practically broadcast live on Facebook, it literally paralyzed me. I could not get out of bed. I felt distraught. I felt confused. I felt sad. I felt angry. I had all of these emotions, and I just literally couldn't move because I am the mom of two Black sons. And at the time, they were 7 and 4. They're now 11 and 8. And what came to my mind immediately is something you all probably know, which is psychological studies have shown that by the time Black boys reach the age of 10, they go from being viewed as innocent young children, the way we see them, to being viewed as potential aggressors, predators, people who may harm you, people who always fit the description. So as a mom, seeing these images and remembering that, I literally remember thinking, like, I have 3 years to solve this problem. Like, my son is 7. My oldest son has autism, which is another barrier. So by the time he's 10, I need to figure this out. And I just went on Facebook, where we are now, and started a group for Moms of Black Boys. And it was really just to reach out and express what I was feeling and connect with other moms. I only sent it to 30 people who I knew personally who had Black sons. And I had never started a Facebook group. I didn't know how it worked. And people just started adding people, joining virally, and it grew that day to more than 21,000 moms within 12 hours all across the country. And we now have more than 170,000. So to make the story shorter, we quickly mobilized. We got on a call 2 days later on a Saturday morning. We had calls every Saturday. And I remember the first call, people saying, we need to plan a march, we need to do something. And, I'm not a marcher per se. Like, I think marches have their place, but it's not my best talent. And I just remember thinking, we don't need a march, we need a long-term strategy. So by the next call, I developed a mission statement, a 5-point pillar approach. And we were talking about how do we create a sustained strategy whereby moms of Black boys all over the country, and in some cases the world, so I have global members as well, join together to raise our voices in a very strategic and focused way around these issues. So you asked about policies. We've chosen to focus on, since we started, around police brutality, we focus on things like de-escalation training for police officers, increasing de-escalation training, because as a mom, I think it's really unfair for you to ask me to train my sons who are young and have, not fully developed brains on how to interact with people who are supposed to be professionals who are trained and supposed to vow to protect and serve. So de-escalation training, crisis intervention training around police dealing with people with mental health crisis. We've been vocal on bail reform, which, as you know, has gone through a lot in New York. We were vocal on raise the age. So things like that, raising the age of criminal liability. And we also focus on anything that funnels our sons through the school to prison pipeline. So we pay close attention to things like school resource officers being placed in our sons' schools and how they're navigating them to juvenile. So that's just a snapshot of what we do, but we describe ourselves as both a resource and a voice for moms of Black boys. So we're a resource, we provide, information, support to help moms and sons navigate all the situations they may find themselves in. We focus specifically on education, mental health, and criminal justice. And then we're a voice. When we need to speak up, we speak up. We rally around certain cases, which maybe we can talk about more later, because there are a few right now that we're preparing to speak out about.
This is just absolutely amazing. It's part of it. For Ron and Shawn, who we've been in this work for a long time, it's clear, like we've always said, we can't do this work without Black women, side by side. Because the level of intensity of the response of your answer, and that's not your full-time job.
Oh no, I have a lot of other jobs too. We don't even have time for that. But time for working in entertainment.
You're right, David. This would not be a movement. This work would not happen without Black women and Black mothers. So, Depelsha, I'm inspired by just the story.
Yeah,
sure. Thank you.
Yeah. And Shawn, let's just continue in that vein, man. Welcome, and glad that you're here. And for those who don't know, tell them about the work of the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. What was your motivation for starting it? What that work has looked like, for over a decade now that you've been leading that work. Tell us about that.
Sure. And what I will say, is there an echo?
Yes, there is. Yeah.
I don't know what that is about. Okay.
The echo, everybody's hearing an echo. Tell Nancy.
So actually, I didn't even start the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. The work was launched or created at the Open Society Foundations in 2008, and I was hired to come and lead and launch the campaign. It was originally supposed to be a 3-year cross-fund campaign and Open Society Foundations, and the impetus of the launching of the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, there was a 2006 New York Times article, top fold, left corner, don't get any better real estate than that. And the headline said, "The plight of Black men deepens." And that was back in 2006, before social media. And so we were communicating by email, and you probably got a ton of emails about this story. And what it did was really elevate the data that was happening across the country. And when we looked at all positive social outcomes, Black men and boys were at the bottom of those indicators, right? When you looked at the negative outcomes, they were at the top. And for many of us working in African-American communities, Black communities, this wasn't front page news to us, right? This was our lived experiences. This was our brothers, our fathers, our sons, but it ignited a conversation at Open Society Foundations. And at the time, their focus in the United States, this is George Soros's philanthropy, there was a great deal around the criminal justice reform and building the re-entry movement. And the conversation at the foundation was, if we are a progressive, risk-taking foundation based on building open societies, investing in those that are closest to the challenges, why aren't we at the front end of this crisis in the United States with Black men and boys? And the discourse was, some folks responded both on the board and on staff, well, we are invested in Black men and boys. Look at our criminal justice fund. We're investing $20 million a year. Very important work. But this was a moment where we had some folks on the board. Lonnie Grenier was on the board, and she had just written a book, Canaries in the Mine. And the argument was, here's an opportunity for Open Society Foundations to invest in the front end of the prison pipeline for Black men and boys. And it's very important to say that there were folks like, at the time, Lauren Harris at the Ford Foundation. Years before that, Dr. Bobby Austin at Kellogg Foundation. He created the Village Foundation. Folks like Dr. Mincy, and like, so when we launched this in 2008, this wasn't new work. This was a continuum of work. And, you know, I really believe there's power in being at the right place at the right time. And so when we launched the campaign, again, we originally was supposed to be just a 3-year campaign. You know how philanthropy is sometimes. Generational, 4 centuries long challenge, and we're going to slap a 3, maybe if you're lucky, a 5-year campaign. And quite frankly, David, this was my first foray in the philanthropic sector. I worked at the Harlem Children's Zone, Mentoring Partnership of New York. And when I joined Open Society Foundation, they said, take off your direct service hat. We are only about structural change, policy, advocacy. And I wasn't smart enough not to push back. And I said, it's not an either or, it's a both and really approach the work and my community building, organizing framework, and began to create spaces where it wasn't just philanthropists in the room, but activists, philanthropy, the private sector. And so what we began to do was build community. And at the time, folks said this was not a movement. This was not a field. It was just too disconnected. And what we did was we ignored that, and we began, you know, language is really important. And we began to call it a field of Black male achievement. And I think one thing that's really important is that we launched with a framework of being unapologetic about Black men and boys, that this was a focus on Black men and boys. And while our narrow angle lens was Black men and boys, our wide angle lens was really a community building strategy that was inclusive of everyone. We had early on a number of our early investments in organizations, single moms raising Black boys. So being unapologetically Black was one of the launching pads. Also knowing that it takes strategic partnerships, that no one philanthropy, one organization is going to lead this work. And we were very intentional about creating cross-sector partnerships. And we also found out, the third thing I want to lift up is a couple of other things. So I know Ron is going to take up the rest of the hour once he gets started talking.
No, he's not.
But what we found was that investing in leadership development and organizational sustainability, right? That was really important, that we were demanding when we were in the foundation. As you know, we spun off in 2015, recently just announced that we were sunsetting, and I'll talk more about that later. But the importance in investing in leaders and organizational sustainability. And we really had a high level of Rashid Shabazz a year into the campaign for Black male achievement. We brought him on, and he had a keen strategic approach around communications and storytelling, right? And then, you know, just sustaining the work. And one of the things I want to say, you know, the topic today is saving our sons, right? And this is, May is National Mental Health Awareness Month, right? And one of the things that we learned very vividly firsthand and working with leaders in the Black male achievement field is, yes, we got to save our sons, but we also got to save ourselves, that we have to put the oxygen mask on ourselves.
Amen.
And David, you may have been at that fifth rumble when we asked leaders, who of you are going through issues of depression? 3/4 of the room raised their hands, and others raised their hand and said that they talked about suicide. And one of the things that we have really elevated was this whole notion of BMA health and healing strategies, and focusing on the health, wellness, and healing of leaders like that are on this Zoom production.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow. I mean, so again, what's captured even in your opening remarks from both of you is just a level of intensity and commitment to taking on this huge challenge. And you know, we've been joined in this movement by so many all across the country. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Shout out to our dear sister Susan Taylor, who's been out here in this movement with us as well. She's watching tonight. Want to welcome her as well. So my brother Ron Walker, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
My fellow educator. But it just tells us about you know, your background, Ron, and what was your inspiration for getting into this movement, and what the work of the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color has been about all these many years.
Thank you, D. I'd be happy to. Let me first say, you had to echo too. I'm on this call with some dynamic people. You know, I got Sister Depelsha, reminds me of Ida B. Wells, the Sojourner Truth, all wrapped up in one package. She also reminds me of my mother, Dolores Walker. You know, the same kind of advocacy and championship. You know, the same sort of verb that she's going to speak on behalf of social justice. So I appreciate her. My brother Shawn Dove, you know, I'm going to talk about him a little bit more, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for the support that Shawn, because I came to his office being one of those early applicants for some support. And I'll say that to a bit, because, you know, he was the one that launched us. But David Banks, let me talk to you and talk to the audience about you, because, you know, we met in 2006. And I read that same article, that New York Times article. And if you remember, I had also talked to Rosa Smith at the time, who was leading the Shot Foundation. And she was doing a lot of work with black boys and education in schools. And, you know, all this was triggered even prior to that by two other things. Number one, early on in my life, I saw that image of Emmett Till. And I asked my mother, I said, what happened to that boy? Because of this grotesque mask. And so she, in her cautious way, was telling me about the segregation, hate, racism that was taking place, and he was a victim of it. And so I said, where did this happen, Mom? She said, it happened in Mississippi. I said, well, you know what? I ain't never going to Mississippi. Now, as fate has it, 10 years later, I was in Mississippi, okay? But that was sort of the trigger, because I was in my mind, was stirring around what's going on. So going to school, you know, I had a counselor who said, I don't know whether you should go to college. Maybe you should do something else. Dolores Walker went up to the high school. I'm 17 years old. She goes on a bus with me. She said, Mr. Murray, now I know my son ain't crazy. Maybe you are. He's going to college. So she was the one who advocated for me. Again, a black mother advocating for a black male, you know, to do something that I didn't think I could do. She also used to remind me about my destiny by reciting From Mother to Son by Langston Hughes on a very regular basis, right? So all this was setting the stage as I look back on it now. And then I went to Lincoln University, went to Mississippi when I was 19, you know, saw poverty, saw all that kind of stuff, saw what it felt to be black, living in the South, living in America, came back and started teaching school. And I lost my first black boy when I was 22 as a teacher in Philadelphia, a young man by the name of Wendell Holliday. And Wendell was one of my brightest students, 7th grade. And one day he came to me and said, Mr. Walker, I have to leave. We're moving to North Philly. And, you know, I loved you as a teacher. I said, I love you as a student. I said, just keep on doing what you're doing, Wendell. You're going to be great. So he said to me, he said, Mr. Walker, I know I am, because one day I'm going to be president of the United States. And this is back in 1975. Okay. You know, Depelsha wasn't even born then. It was 1975. Okay.
I was
and so
born.
a week later, I got the word that he was killed in a gang fight. He was killed by another black boy. So, you know, I was at 22, suffered my first loss. The other student, Kevin Johnson, which I've told this story many times, was another bright genius of a young man, good looking, handsome, personable. And so I said the same thing to Kevin. I said, keep on the right road. Success will lead you that way. So years later, while I'm in a principal's chair, I get a letter from the penitentiary. Opened it up. It was from Kevin Johnson. He said, Mr. Walker, you won't believe where I am, but I'm incarcerated for life for allegedly murdering somebody. I didn't do it. But I remember what you used to tell me about education, right? So as you know the story, years later, because we were writing all those years from 1986 to the present day, in 2006, and all this stuff in 2006, I saw the article in the New York Times. In 2006, I got an invitation from the prison where Kevin Johnson was incarcerated because of his advocacy to be the keynote speaker to the 200 black men who were getting their GEDs and college credits. So I flew to Philly, drove the 3 hours, had a chance to lay eyes and break bread with my former student, who's now in his 40s, right? And then I followed an inmate. And the inmate said to me, this was in September 2006. He said to the audience, he was a valedictorian. He said, although I'm incarcerated for life, I'm a felon, I may not see freedom, I'm free because I'm educated. That was my turning point. All these things are starting to happen. That was my turning point to start something. So that's when I reached out to Rosa Smith, went into her office and said, you know, I'd like to start something. She said, well, I'm gonna give you a little bit of money. I'll give you $10,000, see where you can do a workshop. That's when I called you, David, right? I called you in 2006. I said, David, Rosa Smith said that you all that in a bag of chips. When you come and do a workshop, you came into Boston. I picked you up at the airport, right? We started talking. And I remember what you said after we had the session. You said, we need somebody to connect the dots. Never forget that. He said, I'm going to introduce you to somebody else. Why don't you give this brother, Shawn Dove, a call? All right. And so I called Shawn and had an appointment. And I always tell the story. It was 95 degrees that hot July day. I was suited and booted, you know, went to Open Society Foundation and met Shawn, who was, you know, in starting out, you know, the program officer. And I said, Shawn, this is my vision. I want to start something that brings schools together that really looks at educating black and brown boys to the highest level. He said, I'm calling it, I said, I'm calling it Kozbach. So Shawn said, what kind of name is that? So I said, it's the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color. He said, well, I'm gonna drop something on you. I'm gonna give you a shot. And it was Shawn who made that investment that really started to propel us, right? Wow. And so we did the first gathering of leaders, you know, in Boston, if you remember. Right. Then we did the second in Atlanta. And then we just started doing these events because, you know, for me, I realized, and Depelsha, back to one of the points you made earlier, what we also know from the research, the Yale study, that black boys were getting expelled in preschool, you know? Yeah. So if they get expelled in preschool and, you know, all that cherubic and energy, whatnot, by the time they get to elementary school, the direst chaos, you know, because, you know, now they become from a gift from God to a menace to society. So it was my belief that we had to rally to start what I call the conspiracy of care, right, to really look at how we can advance the social, emotional, cultural, and academic development of black and brown men, boys. So, you know, everybody here has been instrumental in what we do over these years.
How many years has it been for Kozbach now?
It is now in its 14th year.
Wow. Wow. See, one of the things I think is important, and for the listening, those who are watching tonight, right, is we want solutions. We want a response to the challenges that our communities face. But a lot of times we want it in a bottle, we want it quick. And I think what's being demonstrated here is that the individual passion of leaders who stepped up without a blueprint to say, I'm going to do something. Depelsha said, I'm just calling my friends, and how that can spark a movement, but then to be dedicated to that movement And not to say, well, we're going to change course and get out of this after a year. We're going to move on to something else. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes determination. And I think that's been demonstrated by all of you. Now, so people are watching tonight. So we're going to shift gears a little bit because folks who are watching want to know now the work that you are doing, how that can impact their lives right now. This crisis hit us. People didn't see it coming. We're on lockdown wherever we are. Some people are in a better situation than others. Some of us are making the most of a difficult situation, and some people are struggling mightily every day, right? So Depelsha, I want to ask you, because I was speaking to a young lady earlier today, and she was just talking about, raising her child and just not even being fully aware of the depth of trauma that her child is facing just by losing the routine of school and her friends and being around everybody and friends who are raising their boys and the challenges that they're facing, even if the home life is pretty solid, right? And so I just wanted to ask you, since the pandemic started, right, what are you hearing from your members all across the country, and in fact, even around the world? And in particular, talk about some of the single mothers and what they need most to support their sons, both academically and emotionally during this time. What are you doing, and what are you hearing, and how are you all kind of responding to that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I will say it is definitely hard. It's hard for many of us. And, I am probably among the more well-resourced of moms. And even for me, every day is a struggle. Like, I came to this exhausted, having worked remotely all day and homeschooled 2 children with very different needs all day. And, I'm in a better case scenario, but many moms don't have, I have a husband at home who's for the most part helpful, somewhat helpful, we'll say. And he's cooking tacos right now. It's Taco Tuesday, he's cooking. So let me give him a shout out.
All right.
But, and I'm doing this. But many moms are single mothers. And not only that, we found that in the Facebook group, many of our moms, they are the essential workers. They are the first responders. So not only do they don't have the luxury of being able to work remotely. So now they have the added responsibility of their jobs as nurses, as EMT, as MTA, as, cleaning people, whatever the case may be, and they have to go out into the world and literally put their lives at risk and then figure out how they're going to care for their children. And whether you're a first responder or essential worker or not, what we are all facing right now is having to take on multiple roles. And as you know, Black women have always had to already wear multiple hats and play multiple roles, but now we have to be, in many cases, the breadwinner, but we're also the teacher, we're also the cafeteria lady, the cleaning lady. We're playing all these roles, so it's putting a lot of stress on people, and we see people expressing that stress. So what we're doing and what we have done for the past 2 years is, in May, we always focus on mental health awareness and really educating people around the signs of various mental illnesses and how to we've always focused on the sons and how to identify those issues in your sons, whether it's schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or ADHD, autism. We did autism awareness last month, but this year, given the situation, we're focusing specifically on how people can respond to the crisis. So this Saturday, actually, we're having our monthly webinar featuring a speaker named John Nwasu. He's a counselor in the Cobb County school system in Atlanta. And he's going to be talking about, his topic is Secure the Bank, emotional banking in a time of crisis. And he's going to give us some specific tools on how you navigate this time. And what we're hearing from moms is they need, I know I'm talking to educators, but many people have expressed frustration with the schools. And the schools kind of, many of them are uploading assignments in the morning, and then they step away and we don't hear from the teacher again. And it's on the parents to make sure the kids complete those assignments. And if you're working and you're stressed yourself and you have all this responsibility, it's very hard to execute against this. So we need more support from the schools in many cases. Yes. In many cases, I'm hearing that, this situation has exacerbated already existing mental health issues that our sons face. So many moms are reaching out, needing resources around mental health support. And we're actually looking at ways we can mobilize around that and provide support. One thing we've done that you should check out on our website is we're building a database of resources. We started with New York State to really identify providers, whether it's mental health providers, attorneys, educational advisors, et cetera, who can really advise moms and sons through various situations. So you can go on our site and look up a provider if you have a specific need around these things. And that's an ongoing thing that we're building. But right now we're
Where's that
mainly
site? Tell the folks where that's at.
mobunited.org is mobbunited.org.
Right.
And look under resources. So we have a lot of resources there around mental health awareness and also our provider database that we continue to build. But all of our conversations this month are going to be about how to respond specifically to this crisis. And I think as a mom, what I would say to people is, we're living in a VUCA world. The term VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think what we have to do for our children is admit that we don't have all the answers. Nobody has the answers on how we get out of this. So don't pretend that you do, and don't feel like you have the responsibility to tell them what the solution is, but really, I'm trying to equip moms to engage our children becoming problem solvers with us. Like, how do we collectively get through this? And I'll just share this one gem from my son, and I'll turn it over. When this first started, I explained to my kids, we've never been through anything like this before. We don't know how this ends. We've never in our lifetimes, I haven't, my parents haven't, your grandparents haven't, nobody has ever been through a moment like this. So just understand that we are in uncharted territory. And I told my 8-year-old son, who's particularly curious, that, my great-grandmother, she was born in 1902, and there was the Spanish flu of 1918. This is way back in like March when this first started. Last night he told me, I guess I was looking frustrated, and he said, Mom, you shouldn't complain. Mama Nellie, that's my great-grandmother, had it worse. She didn't have TV to tell her what was going on. She didn't have a phone with constant alerts to give her updates. She didn't have the internet. All she had was her own eyes to let her know what was going on. And not only that, she also had the Spanish flu, and she had World War I. This is my 8-year-old. So you shouldn't complain.
That's right.
So the fact that I shared that perspective with him early on and he retained it, then flipped it back to me in a time that I needed it. Because he saw that I was fragile and stressed and on edge. So I think we have to, express that we're in this together with our children, and nobody has the answer. And that's what Mob United is all about, being that network of support. So we're constantly sharing tips and information. How are you managing homeschooling? How are you managing meal planning? Every aspect of this, we're in it together. And that's really what our organization is all about.
That's an amazing organization. What's your son's name?
Grant. That's my 8-year-old. General Grant, we call him.
General Grant.
That's right. He's a general, and he's going to be a general, and he's going to be out here leading this movement one of these days. We appreciate that. We appreciate him. Absolutely. And, Shawn, as we pivot, we talk about your national scope, right? And things that are happening on the ground, your policy work, how you've helped to impact, this movement all across the country. We've got people who are listening now who want to hear a little bit more about, how since this COVID crisis has struck, how have your partner organizations across the country responded? And so we've even got elected officials who are on tonight. We're always looking to hear, what are the kinds of things that we should do. And my good friend, New York State Attorney General Tish James, she's joined us this evening as well. So she's in the audience and she's listening. She's been interested in this issue and deeply committed and concerned about it for many, many years. Give her a little insight on what this is looking like across the country and the work with your partner organizations.
Yeah, thanks to Depelsha for just describing and lifting up, I think, this sense of community, and us. We are communal people, and I think one thing, David, to lift up is that Black folks are experiencing the pandemic before the pandemic, right? That there was stresses and structural issues in our community that the pandemic has elevated. So one of the things that I really want to lift up is that with our national network of 8,000 leaders and 3,000 organizations, at the heart of that is like community building and connecting each other across the country. And so the adaptability and creativity, once we began to be forced to be sheltered in, instances like this, we early on had a call with our response, the Black community's response to COVID-19. We had Ron Walker on that call. We had Anthony Smith from Cities United, Susan Taylor, and an opportunity for us to come together and say, just as Depelsha said, we may not have all the answers, but this is how we are responding. And also, I think it's important for us to remember not to forget. And while we may not have experienced a pandemic and to this light, but we have in this land, we have gone through slavery, we have gone through Jim Crow, and there is a history of us being resilient. It's sad and distressing, and I'm hearing stories on the ground of people dying, right? Yes, we're hearing about organizations closing, but we're hearing about people dying, and people and our people where there are inequities just being magnified, and folks being able to get tested. If you have resources and access, being able to get tested, being able to get the health care. And so what I'm seeing is that there's an alarm about what do we do post-pandemic, right? Yeah. And a couple of things with the campaign for Black male achievement, I like Zoom because we have prompts, and I want to lift up Dr. Phyllis Hubbard, who led our BMA Health and Healing Strategies. The need for addressing many of the conditions, what are they called? The pre-existing conditions. Right? She's been talking about this in the field for more than a decade, right? And some of the issues that we are seeing around hypertension, obesity, diabetes, she was like, no, we've been trying to elevate this in our community. I also think of the work, another Black woman, of Dr. Jolly, who leads our Black Male Equity Initiative. And what we are seeing on the ground, those that have cushion financially, or those that are able to resource and create cooperatives and share and do some cooperative economics, are able to get through and have a cushion when it comes to resources. And she has been, Dr. Jolly, talking about how do Black men build wealth their own way, right? And so many of the strategies that CBMA has been involved in is amplified the need for during this pandemic.
Yep. Appreciate that. Yep. For sure. Ron, the signature event for COSBOC over these years has been the gathering, right? I mean, bringing educators together from all around the country. Tell for the folks who are watching now who don't know about the gathering, just tell us about what the gathering actually represents, and how are you responding now in the midst of this pandemic, because you were not able to have the gathering this year. That's the signature event. People look forward to that event all year long across the nation. What have you been able to do in response to the fact that you've not been able to have the actual event? But tell us first about the gathering, what it represents.
Sure. Thanks, Dave, for asking that question. First of all, we never say conference, because anybody, and all of us have been to conferences, many of them. The first thing you do at a conference, particularly if you're in a nice city like Miami, New York, you're trying to find a way to get out of the conference. So we call this the gathering of leaders, education leaders, community leaders. And it's meant to be reunion, revival, restoration. It's meant to be all enlightenment, reconnection, making new connections. So, we bring together the best that we can find of those people who are advocates and champions for the cause, men and women who understand what's at stake. So the workshops are dynamic, the speakers are dynamic. And we also have a component that we've added on the past 6-7 years called the Young Men's Passage. So not only do we have the adults who experience a revitalization, that's another one of those RE words, but we bring at least 150 to 200 young men from around the country who go through a rite of passage over 2 days, who connect with other young men around the country. So the gathering has been sort of that mecca of sorts. And of course, we were really highly, highly disappointed when I was in Seattle on the 31st of January. We were ready to roll. We even had someone, and Shawn, not only did we have a dynamic slate, but we also had a comedian, you know, because we were going to have comedy at Kozbach, because in this work, it's also equally important, as Shawn said, for self-care, and laughter is part of a healing therapy. You know, so we were really going to really do it. So when that got canceled, we had to do a hard pivot, you know, down in the paint. We had to pivot hard and say, what will we do next? And so we decided to do the virtual gathering 2020. And I'm pleased to say that last week on the 28th, we had a dynamic presenter, Dr. Bettina Love. If you don't know her work, you know, just look her up. And she really talked about, we can't go back to the way things were. Kind of touches on some of the things Depelsha was talking about, and Shawn. We know that in schools, there's been a lot of this, those of us who've been around schools long enough, inequality, right? We know that we are we're not gifted and talented, or AP or IB in sufficient numbers. So there's a lot of disparities that were always there. What this pandemic did was to snatch the cover and say, okay, this is what it really looks like for those who are marginalized. So we decided that what we wanted to do in this virtual space was first to have her to talk about the schools were failing students before the pandemic, right? We were doing things that would, you know, not serving our young people and Black boys before the pandemic. So we can't go back to those things. We have to change our ways. And literally, we have to start school differently, okay? So a few years back, I started a project in Philly called Starting School Differently, because we're so used to this agrarian calendar. You know, at the end of Labor Day, we go back, you know, in the same rhythms and routines. And what Starting School Differently, that model, which I really want to try to restore, what we did, we contacted parents in July. We sent them an invitation. We took a school in Philadelphia, in North Philly, and we took 2 teachers to be the pilot project. And we sent the parents and every one of those teachers an invitation, said, come to school because we want to celebrate you as your child's first teacher. We want to find out what you know about Shawn or Depelsha. So as the first teacher, tell the new teacher what you know. That project was so successful for a variety of reasons. Number one, it lifted up parents. You know, it really made them partners in this educational endeavor. It really gave the teacher that much more, because you can't teach somebody you don't know. And sometimes it takes our teachers weeks and months to get to know somebody, unless you act out, then they're gonna know you real quick. So, you know, whatever the model might be, we know that we have to start school differently. One, we have to also start school compassionately. Now, the state superintendent of Georgia said, when we start school, it has to be compassion over compliance. See, we sometimes to get right back into the testing mode. We can't do that. So we can't do some of those things that, you know, have been traditional. We have to start it differently. So on May the 28th, I'm pleased to say that in this pivot we're making, we're bringing Dr. Shawn Ginwright. And those who know Dr. Shawn Ginwright knows that he speaks mightily about healing-centered approaches. And he's going to talk about healing-centered approaches in this day of the pandemic, COVID-19. And he's going to give tools, he's going to give strategies, techniques. So that's May 28th, Dave, at 12 o'clock East Coast time. It's on our website. So he will be someone who can give currency to what we need to do going forward.
Great. And the website for Kozbach again, just so that everybody knows.
www.kozbach.org. And I'm also pleased to show you this. This is our core document, Standards and Promising Practices for Schools Educating Boys of Color. Nice. And years ago, you know, Shawn and OSF wrote this, and it's in this 4th edition. And this is also a document that will be useful for educators and parents as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Kozbach, C-O-S-E-B-O-C. Thank you, Ron.
C-O-S-E-B-O-C. Some people say Kozbach, some people say whatever. Kozbach.
You know, Depelsha, I'm just so thrilled to hear about your work in terms of trying to help change the perception in the media around, you know, what this looks like for our people and how we are often depicted. We hosted a conference several years ago, and it was a group that came in and they did a piece, and it was something, they showed a piece of video that I never forgot. And it was a crime scene. It was a murder that took place at Cabrini Green houses in Chicago. and the reporter on the scene, you know, you had the yellow tape, and the reporter at the scene said, you know, this is a terrible situation happening out here, and we even got a little boy that's out here and want to just get his feelings on it. It was a little black boy who was about 11 years old, and they gave him the microphone, and they said, "What are your feelings about what's happening?" And he said, "I can't wait until I get older so I can get me a gun too."
Yeah.
And then they went back to the media, went back to the desk in the station, and they said, "Wow, like kind of like this negative thing can just continue on." But that's not what the young man actually said. What the young man said was, in its fullness, he said, "I can't wait until I get older and I get me a gun too, because I want to be a policeman and stop all the bad people from hurting the good people in my community." Somebody made an editorial decision to cut that last part off, which furthered, right, this depiction. Now you got little black boys, and you see how this cycle continues. Black boys that you got to continue to be afraid of. So people make decisions to perpetuate that kind of imagery. And so the work that you're doing, I'm asking you this question: what do we as consumers do to help influence mass media to change the depictions of people of color?
And, you know, that is such a loaded question. You know, you talked about my other jobs, and I've spent my entire career in entertainment and media. I started in news media, went to entertainment. Now I'm currently working in news media before moving on to philanthropy. So I need to talk to Shawn about that. But, you know, who's in the decision-making seat matters a lot. Like, I started out as a journalist, as a frontline reporter, and figured out very quickly that I needed to be on the decision-making side of things, because once you get to the individual storytelling level out in the field, a lot of decisions have already been made. Someone has decided what stories we're telling in the first place, what stories are worthy of telling, what stories are not worthy of telling. They've decided what angle they want it told from. They've decided what voices and perspectives they want included. So my goal has always been to make my way to a decision-making seat as it relates to media and entertainment, and to mentor and bring along as many people as possible to do that. So from an industry side, that's always been my focus. As consumers, which is what you asked, I think, you know, what you have to do is support the type of content and narratives that you want to see. And, you know, it's easier said than done. If you ask anyone, we did a lot of research when I worked at BET in particular. We did a lot of research. You go to focus groups, you ask people, what do you watch on TV? Without fail, people tell you they watch Discovery and PBS in a focus group, right? So then you start getting into a conversation about, well, what about Basketball Wives? And what about Love and Hip Hop? And what about, and they say, oh, no, I don't watch that. But then they know every character, they know every scene. Like, well, how do you know all this if you're not watching? So people want you to believe, you know, that they're a certain type of person who likes certain kind of content, but our actions show otherwise. Now, if you know how the industry works for all media, you know, there's Nielsen and other measurement agencies, and if you don't have a Nielsen box, you're not really being counted. But in the age of digital media, everything is being counted. So that's changed the game. So companies like Time Warner and, Cablevision, they can track on their set-top boxes that are in your home who's watching what. So the data is there to be culled. Also, the power of the internet has changed the game. So if you go on and through social media, like and comment and share certain things, people are paying attention to that. Decisions are being made based on how many views things have, based on how many people have shared something, based on the level of engagement, we call it, the depth of the conversation, and how much time people are spending. So if you really want to see a change in narratives, you have to either create them yourselves, which is the thing I've been focused on, or if you're a consumer, you have to actually support the type of storytelling that you say you want. And I can tell you from being in the industry for more than 20 years in large numbers, that is not the case. I can tell you, like, every time BET tried to do like a positive show, you remember BET Honors or new specials on Ferguson, like we were doing some deep stuff because, you know, we got criticized a lot for the other stuff, but their numbers don't lie. Every time you do anything like that, the ratings plummet. So it is an investment. It is an investment in social good to take those risks when you know the audience isn't going to respond. So I just want to say to consumers, viewers, listeners, readers, support the type of narratives you want to see. And if you're able to get in the game, create the type of narratives you want to see, because now the barriers are low for that. You no longer have to get a distribution deal and production deal. You can go straight to YouTube and create your own content and build your own following without a marketing budget, without a production budget. Many people are creating shows on iPhones. So I would also say create your own narratives. And I just have to give a shout out to you, David, because before this whole thing fell apart, I reached out to you and we were in the process of planning an event together that was all about, positive narratives of Black boys, and having Eagle students specifically share their narratives, because I would say to date, Mob United has been very focused on the moms and equipping the moms to speak out. But our next phase is we want to hear more from the young men themselves about their experiences and empower them to speak out about these issues as well. So I look forward to hopefully by the fall or no later than 2021, we can get back to that.
Absolutely, and we will do that. And you are continuing to build on the work of an organization. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It may still be around, but 20 years ago it was going strong. It was called CEMOTAP, the Committee to Eliminate Media Offensive to African People. And there are some folks involved with that. I'd love to connect you with them because they were grinding back in the day, tough struggle. But they learned some lessons that I'm sure will be helpful to you in the work that you're doing right now. So let's follow up on that as well.
Okay, wonderful.
And speaking about just those young men, right? So Shawn, give a message, give a word to the young men who are watching, right? And even those who are not watching, and their moms and dads are going to go back and share a message from Shawn Dove about what those young men can do to lean on each other right now, right? I mean, they can make excuses. There are a lot of stuff. There's tough situations. You got sometimes 5 and 6 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. They've been locked down. It's been hard. What does Shawn Dove leave with them as a gem for the young men themselves? Give us a word.
So the first thing I would want every young man listening or their parents is that I love you. We love you. That we have a community, a village around you that we believe in you, right? And I think that is the very first thing. I think also the message that you are not defined by your worst mistake, right? And that it's not, how far you fall or what mistakes you make, it's how high you bounce. And I would also say that, we need you. We need you, that you are, it's a cliche, but it's true when you hear that, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. And we want our young men and young women to know in our community that our hope and our dreams lie within you and the choices that you make. I would also, I think Depelsha brought this up, this whole issue of trauma and unrecognized and unreconciled trauma that our young people are going through. And I would say, ask for help. Find somebody to ask for help, because what you are going through, you are not the you're not the only one, right? And I think that just emanates the ethos of the campaign for Black male achievement. Love, learn, lead, and like you're not the leader of the future. You're the leader of right now.
That's right. That's right. Appreciate that. Thank you. We got one question, Ron. I'd like for you to tie this in, right? We got a question from Patrick Jenkins. He says, shouldn't we move past the existing agrarian model of education and move toward a more holistic model with a longer school day and school year, and fight for a structure that provides for consistency in the curriculum? And I want you to connect your answer to that to, the standards, that the book you held up a moment ago. Tell folks what that is, and how do you connect the answer to the question that was posed by Patrick Jenkins?
Yeah, I think, as we said earlier, school has to be done differently. Now, it doesn't mean that we suddenly going to have, if we have a longer school year, just to pack that school year with tests and other things, just to say we get into a particular standard. I believe that one of the things that this pandemic has allowed us to do is to understand who we really are. We have to know ourselves. We have to know our kids. We have to provide instruction that's culturally relevant, culturally centered instruction. If you don't know your story, you don't know your power. And so very often, you know, with our kids, with our boys and our girls in school, they're not getting that. So if whatever we do in terms of returning back to school, it has to be a different focus. And see, I would say that one of the things that's going to make that happen is the lobbying effort and the advocacy effort that we're going to have from MOB, from Moms for Black Boys, you know, from the work that Shawn is doing and other organizations that say, we're not going back to schooling, because schooling is for compliance. We're going for education for liberation, okay? So the whole mindset that, you know, I would recommend too, that schools do a whole different kind of approach to sharing this message. For example, if I'm teaching a group of Black boys, I want to make sure that they read Hakeem Madaboudi's The Book of Life, that talk about what will happen once they realize their full selves. I'd want these young men to read Malcolm X. I'd want them to read Langston Hughes' Dreams Deferred, Mother to Son. You know, so the planning of the cultural responsive approaches to instruction, whatever the year is, long or short, has to be front and center. You know, we have to seize back our young people in our communities, because we've been turning it over to somebody else, to the textbook vendors. And so, you know, it's going to be important and imperative that our parents speak on this behalf. The more they know, the more they lobby, right? It can't be the union against the parents. You know, educators got to understand that this is a different kind of game plan. And I know I'm not going back. I'm not letting my grandkids go back to the old schooling model. You know, so if I were to tell again, I like that question you asked of Shawn too. And it is about love. You know, I have found that this work in the Black male achievement movement, there have been more Black men been saying to each other, I love you. Now, some people might say, wow, you know, you telling another man I love you? Yes, we do. And there ain't nothing weak about it, you know? And I think we have to let our young men know that this is not being weak to say, I love you, or asking for love, or asking for hope and trust, you know, and just to make sure that we let them know that they are the future. They are the innovators, game changers, right? And we can create anything, and we can create chitlins into a delicacy, you know, so it's nothing that we can't do. And so when they go back to school, we have to imbue in them this knowledge that they are fully ready and capable, but we got to blend that with compassion, make sure we minister to their social and emotional needs up front before we get to any test.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
David, I just wanted to throw one other thing in there with Ron struck a chord, and I know that the title for tonight's talk is, you know, Save Our Sons. And I think the overarching is like, you know, how do we save our nation, right? How do we save our cities, and how do we save our schools? Because too often there's nothing wrong with Black men and boys in America, right? It is the systems and it's the structures that they are growing in, right? And how do we purify this water in this nation that our young men and Black people are swimming in, right? And so it's the nation and the cities and the systems that need saving. You know, yes, our boys, but I think we need to uplift that overarching approach.
Right.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So we're about at the end. I would like just to have each one of you just offer up a closing statement. Depelsha, congratulations. You will be moving on to become, I understand, the COO at the Ford Foundation. That's a big, big job. We'll be rooting for you. We got your back, and we're very, very happy for you. Because we know you're a sister who is conscious, and you're going to go there and do the right thing. So we're rooting for you. But leave us with a word, and particularly if there's anything about your own routine that you do, keep smiling and to stay well, that you might offer up to the folks who are watching this evening.
Sure. Well, one thing I'll say, self-care is a very important part of Mob United. I didn't share our 5 pillars that I literally wrote 1 week after the Facebook group started, but they are to change perception, which we talked about, influence policy, which we talked about, demonstrate our power politically and economically. So, you know, that's critically important this fall, to partner strategically with like-minded individuals and organizations like you. And the 5th pillar that is not at all the least important is promote self-care. So that is, you know, an active part of organization and something that we focus on in terms of being mindful of our wellness. I always like to say that this is a long-term struggle and we need fuel for the fight. So if you're not prepared, if you're not sustaining yourself and investing in your own self-care, we're not going to make it. This is not, you know, this didn't start a year ago, so it's not going to be over in a year. This has been hundreds of years in the making, and hopefully it won't take that long, but it's going to be a while. So we have to be prepared for that. So I always try to prepare people for the long-term nature of this work. What I do on a personal level, lots of bubble baths, especially with extra time, prayer, meditation, virtual church. I get a lot of joy out of spending time with my children in a more leisurely way. We cook together, a lot of laughter. So that's kind of my personal routine. But I do just want to share one other thing before we close, which is that there's the support side of Mob United, but there's also the advocacy side. And I just want to say that if you're in New York, our next mobilization is to go to the Civilian Complaint Review Board meeting on May 13th. We can all go now because it's virtual. So you can't say you couldn't make it because you were late at work. And we're asking people to show up to speak out about the injustices we're seeing here in New York around how people of color are being treated by police in the face of COVID-19. You saw all the images, if you were paying attention, of, you know, Christopher Pier. I was in Fort Greene Park. I saw lots of young white people sitting there in, you know, not social distancing, no mask. Police officers walking around, either not saying anything at all, or giving them free masks, literally like they can't afford a mask. And then you contrast that with what happened in the West Village over the weekend, where 2 men and a young lady were actually yanked up allegedly for not social distancing. And if you go online, you watch the video, there is no evidence of that at all. And so we're mobilizing around that case, as well as the case in Georgia of the young man who was driving through a neighborhood and, you know, was literally killed, attacked and killed by 2 vigilante racists. So I want to stay in the zone of self-care, David. I really do. I want to go take a bath and not think about this stuff, but too much keeps happening. So as soon as I get in that zone, I restore only to, you know, return to the fight, because there's still so much work to do.
Wow. Our sister in the movement, you have a very special light which shines on you. I can't begin to tell you how much we want to stay connected with you in this work. I want to thank you for coming. Brother Ron Walker, leave us with a final word, and if there's anything you're doing in terms of your own personal care that you want to share.
Well, I'll start with that. I rise every morning, you know, kind of, you know, my habit is to get up early and say my prayers and give thanks to the Almighty for giving me a new day and a new start. You know, so I start off, you know, because he didn't have to do that. So I'm really, really sort of focused on what can I do that might minister to somebody else. So I make calls to people I haven't talked to. You know, you give calls to the elders, really to say, you know, I'm blessed to be able to do what I'm doing. And so I want to share those blessings with anybody within earshot. And then I go about the work, you know, I do my walking, I try to eat healthy and just try to think positively most of the day. You know, I'm reminded by something Sister Susan Taylor, I've heard her say many times, that the village is on fire, but we are the firemen and the firewomen, right? And so, you know, I think by connecting the dots, you know, making sure that we're not working in silos, that we can put that fire out. And so I'm about, and you know my mantra, David, creating a conspiracy of care, because that's what our village requires right now from us, to do it right now. I would ask that you go to Kozbach too and join, because members matter. You know, mobilization of members matter. So go to Kozbach, www.kozbach or Kozybach, or however you want to say it, and join us. And please join us on the 28th of May, when Shawn Dove is going to be dropping some pearls about positive approaches to healing during this time of COVID.
Appreciate that, Brother Ron. Kwame Ture, the former Stokely Carmichael, said something that I never forgot. He said, if you're not a part of an organization, you're a part of the problem. There are too many issues and challenges that are going on out here for you to just be weighing in with your opinion from your living room. You've got to put in some sweat equity. You've got to be part of something that is working toward trying to solve a problem. And so I appreciate you both for that. And so we're going to wrap it up with my man, Shawn Dove. Shawn, you mentioned earlier that you're going to be sunsetting the organization.
Yes.
So leave us with a word about that. What's next for you? What's next for the work? And what you do for your own level of self-care?
First, let me just clarify. I used to take credit for the work that Shawn Ginwright would do when people would come up to me. So it's not Shawn Dove on May 28th at Coesbach. It will be Shawn Ginwright.
Shawn Ginwright.
Correct that. And
thank you, brother.
you know, and one of the things that Shawn Ginwright says, and this speaks to the self-care, Shawn Ginwright says that the greatest act of social justice is self-care.
Yeah.
Right. And so I try to model what I share with leaders in the CBMA network. If you are not connected to your mentors, an executive coach, and a therapist, and the work that you're doing, you will be challenged. Right. And so therapy at 4 on Thursdays for me has changed my life. I too, like Ron, like to arise early. I call it my morning mission fuel of prayer, journaling, burn some incense, get some quiet time. There's a meditation. Cecilia Lovin has a daily meditation, and I will be engaged in that. And my mantra continues to be the same. And I wanted to, like, for all the folks that are listening, like, so yes, we announced at CBMA after 12 years, we are sunsetting the organization this year. And over the last 72 hours, I have just been saturated with love, gratitude, appreciation. And I knew that, you know, CBMA was really performing some catalytic work, right? But the level of feedback and love that I'm getting from the field, not just for me, but what CBMA has done is just phenomenal, right? And so we know that the work continues, and me as the ever evolving vessel that I am will remain the same. The vehicle for my service will change, but there are thousands of leaders, and we share networks. And you know, I will say that the mantra remains the #1 mantra. You know, there's no Calvary coming to save the day in our community. You know, we are the iconic leaders that we've been waiting for, and the curators. People don't remember this part. We are the curators of the change we're seeking to see, and that tells me that we have everything that we need, right? But how do we coordinate, right? How do we blend and mesh and leverage capital is going to be really important. And so what's next for Shawn Dove? We'll see what's next. I'm focusing on who's next, right? And who do I have to be to continue to grow? And I just want to I know I'm a little bit long-winded, but there's this book here by Michael Bernard Beckwith, right? It's called Life Visioning. And there's this chapter in here about the dark night of the soul. And he's talking about embracing this. And I want to share this for the folks that are listening, because the pandemic has pushed folks to the margins, and folks were already in our community feeling trauma. And there's these 4 lines that he begins this chapter, The Dark Night of the Soul. And he tells us to embrace our dark nights. But what he says is, the world all around me was falling down. And when it crumbled, I saw higher ground. Something happened inside of me. I stepped into my true identity. That's where I am, and so the work continues, the ethos continues, and the the fight. You know, we're in a fight, and that continues. And I just want to thank you, brother, for your leadership, your adaptability, your creativity, and I want to let you know, man, I love you. Rumble, young man, rumble.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I love you too, brother. I love you.
Appreciate you, D. Banks.
I love all of you, and I thank you all on behalf of our audience who tuned in tonight. Those who didn't tune in live, but this will be shared, and we'll have an opportunity to hear the words of wisdom from each and every one of you. I want to invite our audience also to join us next week. Next week will be a very special week. As you remember, you know, this Sunday is Mother's Day. And so we want to lift up and celebrate our moms, and those of us who still have our mothers and grandmothers in our lives, that in spite of this pandemic, they're to be lifted up, they're to be celebrated, they're to be loved, even if we have to do it virtually, right? But next Tuesday, we're going to continue in that spirit of lifting up our moms, and we've got we've got the COO of the Eagle Academy Foundation, Ms. Kanita Lloyd. She's going to sit in this seat, and she will be moderating the conversation next week, which is intended to be a little lighter. And so we will have Misha Ross Porter, who is the executive superintendent of all the schools in the borough of the Bronx. She'll be joining us, and she is one of a kind. We'll be joined by Denise Brown, who's the Eagle Academy Bronx parent coordinator. And she is a special, and looking forward to her coming. And then to close it all out, we've got the indie mom of comedy, Michelle. An award-winning stand-up comedian and solo performer and Open Society Foundation alumni fellow. And the theme next week is going to be about hair and homework, right? Why are you home? And so, you know, what are the women doing to focus on themselves? This will be a show unlike any that we have had. We're encouraging everybody to tune in next week. You're going to laugh. You're going to have a good time. You're going to learn some things. It's going to be a very, very special evening. Ron?
Yeah, Dave, let me just say this about Michelle real quick. You know, because, you know, as since we can't go to the barbershop and my hair is growing and whatnot. So I talked to Michelle. I said, Michelle, my hair is growing. I'm starting to look like Frederick Douglass. She said, look. She said, look, brother. She said, you could have the cul-de-sac look. I said, what is that? She said, you know, hair around the side and nothing in the middle.
Right.
Stop my dress.
Right.
A lot of the women have some other challenges that they're trying to deal with.
Yes, indeed.
So we better not complain. Depelsha, I don't know about you, but I know that Ron, Shawn, and I are three of the biggest Muhammad Ali fans in the world. And I see in Shawn's background, Muhammad Ali and that fight against Sonny Liston in Lewiston, Maine, and it's right in his background. And you may see over my shoulder a casual picture of Ali strolling through the streets of Chicago. And Ron has personal stories of when he met Muhammad Ali. We can go on and on and on, but I'll leave us all with the words of the champ as we close out this evening that says, in spite of this pandemic, we're going to continue to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Rumble, young man, rumble. Rumble, young woman, rumble. Rumble, my people. We have to continue to rumble because we are absolutely going to win this fight. I thank you. I appreciate each and every one of you. Have a blessed evening, and we'll see you out there on the trail. God bless.
Thank you so much. Compassion over compliance, like Ron said.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.